Before we begin, settle into the sound of winter. Snow drifts across the dark courtyard of Winterfell. It gathers along ancient stone walls, settles on the heads of weathered gargoyles, and softens the edges of towers that have stood longer than most kingdoms have existed. Beneath those walls, hidden from the cold, hot springs breathe warmth through tunnels and chambers carved deep into the earth. The same warmth flowed here when kings wore bronze crowns, when dragons had never crossed the narrow sea, and when the oldest stories in Westeros were still remembered as history rather than legend. Tonight's journey, though not a tale of a single night at all, is the complete history of House Stark, a dynasty whose roots disappear into 8,000 years of memory, myth, war, and winter. This is a calm narration meant to carry you gently through the ages of Westeros as torchlight flickers along forgotten corridors and snow falls endlessly beyond the walls. If you've traveled these roads before, quietly note which night you're joining us on. If you're new here, simply call this night one. The wolves of Winterfell have waited a very long time. There is no need to hurry. The question that hangs over House Stark is surprisingly simple. How can one family rule the same land for 8,000 years? In Westeros, dynasties rise and vanish. House Gardner ruled the Reach for centuries before burning on the field of fire. House Hoare built a kingdom stretching from the Iron Islands to the Riverlands before Aegon Targaryen erased it. Even the mighty dragons of Valyria vanished from the world, yet somehow the Starks endured. Kingdoms collapsed around them. Religions changed. Languages shifted. Invaders arrived from distant shores. Through all of it, Winterfell remained. The deeper you travel into their history, the stranger that survival begins to seem. A lone direwolf standing against a wall of snow feels like the perfect symbol for the Starks. But the truth is older still. Long before the direwolf became their sigil, before heraldry existed at all, the North belonged to the first men. Thousands of years before Aegon's conquest, before the Andal invasions, before the doom of Valyria, the first men crossed into Westeros through the Arm of Dorne. The children of the forest already lived upon the continent then. They were smaller than men, deeply tied to the old gods, and said to possess strange powers connected to the weirwoods. The wars between the first men and the children lasted generations until the pact was sworn on the Isle of Faces beneath carved faces in the heart trees. Yet even after the pact, the world would not know peace. The oldest legends speak of the long night, a winter so terrible that darkness covered the world for years. In those ancient stories, cold shadows emerged from the far north. The others, as they are known in the books, marched south while armies of the dead followed in their wake. Brandon the Builder appears in many of these tales. Some legends claim he helped raise the wall after the long night ended. Others say he founded Winterfell. A few stories even credit him with helping construct Storm's End in the distant Stormlands. Historians inside the world often question how a single man could accomplish all of these feats. The mystery remains unsolved. Why does Brandon the Builder appear everywhere important in the oldest history of Westeros? The question becomes more intriguing the closer you examine the evidence. The wall stretches roughly 300 miles across the continent and rises over 700 feet high in places. Winterfell sits hundreds of miles to the south. Storm's End stands on an entirely different coast. Even allowing for legendary exaggeration, these are monumental projects. Some Meisters suggest that multiple historical figures were merged into one legendary founder over thousands of years of oral tradition. Others argue that Brandon truly existed, but that later generations attached his name to every ancient wonder they could not otherwise explain. Whatever the truth, Winterfell itself offers clues to extraordinary antiquity. The castle is unlike any other stronghold in Westeros. Rather than being constructed all at once, it appears to have grown layer upon layer across countless centuries. Massive walls stand beside newer towers. Ancient foundations disappear beneath later additions. The hot springs beneath the castle channel warmth through the stone, keeping parts of Winterfell habitable even during the harshest winters. Maester Luwin remarks upon this unique feature centuries later during the lifetime of Eddard Stark. Walking through Winterfell is less like exploring a castle and more like wandering through a living archaeological record of the North itself. The crypts beneath Winterfell deepen the mystery further. Generation after generation of Stark rulers were buried there with iron swords laid across their laps. Stone dire wolves watch over each tomb. The oldest crypts descend so far into darkness that even members of House Stark rarely visit them. By the time of A Game of Thrones, many names carved into those ancient stones have already faded from memory. Yet the tradition endured. Kings were buried there, lords were buried there. Their descendants walked among them for thousands of years, carrying the weight of ancestors whose stories had become half-forgotten legends. Why did the Starks place such importance upon memory when other kingdoms celebrated conquest and glory? The answer may lie in the nature of the North itself. Winters there are longer, distances are greater. Survival depends less on sudden victories and more on preparation. The Stark words, "Winter is coming," are not a boast, they are a warning. Unlike the proud declarations of houses such as Baratheon, Greyjoy, or Lannister, the Stark words remind every generation that hardship inevitably returns. The phrase feels ancient because it reflects an ancient worldview, one shaped by centuries of brutal winters and old stories about darkness moving south from beyond the wall. As the centuries passed after the long night, the Starks began expanding their power across the North. They were not yet the unquestioned rulers, remembered by later generations. The North was divided among numerous petty kingdoms ruled by rival First Men dynasties. Marsh kings ruled the Neck. Barrow kings held sway from Barrowton. The Red Kings of House Bolton governed lands around the Dreadfort. Along the coasts, smaller rulers commanded fleets and fishing settlements. Every kingdom possessed its own traditions, loyalties, and ambitions. The Starks would spend centuries breaking them one by one. How exactly did the Kings of Winter transform from local rulers into masters of the largest kingdom in Westeros? The chronicles provide fragments. The World of Ice and Fire recounts the defeat of the Marsh Kings and the absorption of their lands into the Stark domain. Other stories tell of a mysterious warg king whose daughters were married into House Stark after his defeat. Some legends describe wars against giants and conflicts with skin changers who ruled isolated regions. Whether every tale is literally true matters less than the pattern they reveal. The Kings of Winter expanded relentlessly. They conquered. They married rivals. They absorbed defeated peoples into their realm. Slowly, the map of the North changed. The conquest of the Barrow kings appears to have been particularly significant. Barrowton sits in a strategically valuable region west of Winterfell and commands important routes across the north. The ancient kings buried in the Great Barrows claimed descent from the first men, stretching back into the Age of Heroes. Defeating them was not simply a military victory. It represented the absorption of another ancient royal lineage into the growing Stark kingdom. Even after their conquest, descendants of those old rulers survived through House Dustin, one of the North's most powerful noble families. This became a recurring pattern. The Starks often destroyed kingdoms but preserved useful bloodlines. Among all their rivals, however, one enemy refused to disappear. House Bolton endured. The Red Kings of the Dreadfort fought the Starks again and again across centuries so numerous that no complete record survives. Bolton banners were once said to display the flayed skin of enemies. Stark chronicles remember rebellions, betrayals, and wars that erupted generation after generation. Yet despite repeated victories, the Starks never eliminated them entirely. That puzzle would shape northern history for thousands of years, and as snow continues to gather atop the towers of Winterfell, the story of those ancient rivalries is only beginning. Why did the Boltons survive when so many other rival kings vanished from history? It is one of the oldest political mysteries in the North. House Stark conquered the Marsh Kings and absorbed their lands. The Barrow Kings lost their crowns and faded into vassalage. Countless lesser dynasties disappeared entirely. Yet House Bolton remained at the Dreadfort, generation after generation, preserving its identity, its power, and even many of its ancient customs. By the era of the novels, thousands of years after the Age of Heroes, the flayed man still flew from Bolton banners, a reminder that some wounds in the North never fully healed. The ancient chronicles describe the Boltons as the Red Kings, rulers whose dominion centered upon the lands east of Winterfell. Their seat, the Dreadfort, stood along the Weeping Water, surrounded by cold forests and lonely hills. Stories from the world of ice and fire speak of Bolton rulers who practiced flaying, preserving the skins of enemies as trophies and symbols of dominance. The exact truth behind these accounts is difficult to determine because so many records from the Age of Heroes are fragmentary. Yet one fact remains consistent across nearly every source. The Boltons and the Starks fought repeatedly, often with extraordinary brutality. The rivalry became one of the defining conflicts of Northern history. Some Northern legends even claim the Bolton kings wore the skins of slain Stark rulers as cloaks. The stories are likely exaggerated by centuries of retelling, but their existence reveals something important. Northern memory never viewed these wars as ordinary disputes over borders or taxes. The conflict carried a deeper emotional weight. The Starks represented continuity, order, and kingship centered upon Winterfell. The Boltons embodied defiance. Even after defeats, they returned. Even after submitting, they rebelled. The persistence of House Bolton became almost as legendary as the endurance of House Stark itself. The answer to why the Starks tolerated their survival may be surprisingly practical. The North is vast beyond easy comprehension. At the time of Aegon's conquest, it contained nearly half the landmass of the Seven Kingdoms. Even powerful kings could not easily administer every river valley, forest, and coastline directly from Winterfell. Great houses were necessary. Powerful bannermen could defend remote territories, collect taxes, and maintain armies. Destroying House Bolton entirely would have created a dangerous vacuum in the eastern north. Instead, successive Stark kings chose a more difficult path. They forced submission, demanded oaths, and maintained watchfulness for generations. Why were the Boltons not the only threat facing Winterfell? Because the North never lacked enemies. Beyond the Wall, wildling kings gathered followers and occasionally descended southward. Some came in search of land, others fled famine or conflict among the free folk. The Night's Watch existed as the first line of defense, but northern lords often fought beside the Black Brothers when danger grew too great. The wall itself formed a colossal barrier of ice, yet even the greatest fortification requires defenders. Throughout history, the Starks repeatedly answered that call. The relationship between House Stark and the Night's Watch stretches back farther than reliable records. According to tradition, the wall was raised after the Long Night. Brandon the Builder is often linked to its construction, though the exact details remain shrouded in myth. What is certain is that the Kings of Winter became the institution's strongest supporters. Stark rulers granted land, supplies, and men to the Watch. Younger sons of noble northern houses frequently took the Black. The bond between Winterfell and the Wall became one of the oldest political relationships in Westeros. One of the clearest examples of this support can be found in the Gift. The Gift consisted of fertile lands south of the Wall granted to the Night's Watch by northern rulers. Later, during the reign of Queen Alysanne Targaryen and King Jaehaerys I, an additional region known as the New Gift was added after Alysanne visited the Wall in 58 AC aboard her dragon Silverwing. Although this event belongs to a much later era, it reflected a tradition already centuries old. The Starks consistently accepted sacrifices that benefited the Watch. Land that could have enriched Winterfell instead supported Blackcloak defenders standing against dangers from the far north. Why does House Stark seem uniquely connected to the ancient warnings surrounding the others? The question emerges repeatedly throughout the novels. Most of southern Westeros treats the others as children's stories. Lords in the Reach discuss harvests, merchants in King's Landing argue over coin, knights in the Westerlands seek glory in tournaments. Yet the Stark words remain unchanged. Winter is coming. Not victory is coming, not prosperity is coming. Winter. The phrase feels less like a family motto and more like a message passed carefully from one generation to another. The crypts beneath Winterfell strengthen this impression. Deep underground, kings and lords rest beneath stone likenesses carved in their image. Iron swords lie across their laps. Old Nan tells Bran Stark that the swords keep restless spirits in their tombs. Maesters dismiss such beliefs as superstition, yet the custom endured for thousands of years. Generation after generation continued placing those iron blades. The reason had long been forgotten. The ritual survived anyway. House Stark often behaves as though memory itself is a sacred duty. Why did the North remain so different from the rest of Westeros, while other regions changed dramatically? The answer begins across the Narrow Sea. Thousands of years after the first men settled Westeros, a new people arrived. They called themselves Andals. Armed with steel weapons and inspired by the faith of the Seven, they crossed from Essos and launched invasions along the eastern shores. The Vale fell first. Andal kings established themselves there before spreading across the Riverlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Stormlands. Entire dynasties disappeared beneath the tide of conquest. In southern Westeros, the cultural transformation proved enormous. The faith of the Seven spread rapidly. Andal customs became dominant. Noble houses proudly traced descent from Andal conquerors. Castles, laws, and traditions evolved accordingly. Yet when the Andals looked northward, they encountered a different challenge. The Neck acted as a natural barrier. Vast swamps, hidden causeways, and hostile terrain made large-scale invasions difficult. House Reed and the Crannog men knew every inch of that landscape. Armies entering the Neck often found themselves exhausted before reaching the heart of the North. The Kings of Winter exploited those advantages relentlessly. Andal invaders launched campaigns northward, but unlike the kingdoms farther south, the North never suffered complete conquest. The old gods remained dominant. Weirwood trees continued standing at the center of sacred spaces. Heart trees watched over castles and villages alike. The First Men language eventually disappeared, yet much of the older culture survived. While southern lords prayed in septs beneath seven-pointed stars, northern rulers continued kneeling before carved faces in white bark and red leaves. This resistance shaped the identity of House Stark forever. The Starks did not merely survive the Andal invasions. They emerged as guardians of an older world. Their castles retained godswoods. Their people remembered ancient legends. Their rulers carried titles and traditions rooted in the Age of Heroes. The result was a kingdom that increasingly felt separate from the rest of Westeros, connected by geography, yet distinct in spirit. And as centuries rolled onward, with Andal kingdoms rising and falling to the south, the wolves of Winterfell continued their long watch beneath the silent eyes of the Weirwoods. Why would a southern house become one of the greatest pillars of northern power? At first glance, House Manderly seems completely out of place in the story of House Stark. The Manderleys worshipped the Seven rather than the old gods. Their ancestors came from the Reach, the most fertile and culturally Andal region of Westeros. White Harbor feels more like a southern trading city than a traditional northern settlement. Yet by the time of the main novels, no major bannerman proved more fiercely loyal to Winterfell. To understand why, you must first travel to a moment when the Starks made one of the smartest political decisions in their entire history. The Manderleys originally ruled along the Mander River in the Reach. Their wealth and influence eventually brought them into conflict with House Peak. Defeated and driven from their ancestral lands, they became exiles. Most rulers would have viewed a displaced foreign noble family as a burden or a threat. The Kings of Winter saw opportunity instead. The Manderleys were granted lands at the mouth of the White Knife, where they established White Harbor. Over generations, they transformed a remote northern settlement into the largest city in the north and its most important port. The benefits for House Stark were enormous. White Harbor connected the north to trade routes stretching across the narrow sea and down the western coast of Westeros. Grain, timber, wool, silver, and furs moved through its harbors. Wealth flowed northward. The Manderleys built fleets, raised walls, and expanded commerce. Unlike many southern immigrants, they never attempted to replace northern customs. They prospered under Stark protection and repaid that protection with unwavering loyalty. Centuries later, Lord Wyman Manderley would risk everything to avenge the Red Wedding, proving how deep that loyalty truly ran. Why did the western shores of the North remain so dangerous for so long? The answer lies beyond the Sunset Sea. Long before the arrival of the Targaryens, Ironborn raiders struck the northern coastline repeatedly. Their longships appeared without warning. Villages burned. Captives were taken. Wealth vanished across the waves. The western coast of the north stretched for hundreds of miles, making complete defense almost impossible. Every generation of Stark rulers faced the same challenge. The sea could deliver prosperity, but it could also deliver enemies. The ancient region, known as Sea Dragon Point, stands as a reminder of these struggles. Sparse, rugged, and difficult to govern, it became one of the North's most exposed frontiers. Ironborn raiders targeted isolated settlements there for centuries. Northern kings fought campaigns against seaborne invaders while simultaneously managing threats elsewhere across their immense kingdom. Unlike southern rulers whose enemies usually approached across roads and rivers, the Starks had to watch forests, mountains, swamps, and coastlines at the same time. Geography made them resilient, but it also stretched their resources constantly. Some of the most dramatic conflicts involved the Ironborn rulers who sought to expand their influence beyond the Iron Islands. During different eras, Ironborn kings carved temporary realms along western shores and river systems throughout Westeros. While exact details of many northern campaigns have been lost, the pattern remains clear. Again and again, Stark rulers resisted foreign domination. Their victories rarely became celebrated songs in southern courts because northern wars often occurred far from the centers of power. Yet these conflicts helped preserve the North's independence for thousands of years. Why did all of that ancient independence end with a single meeting beside a river? To answer that question, we must jump forward to one of the most transformative events in Westerosi history. 3 centuries before the events of a Game of Thrones, a dragon lord named Aegon Targaryen landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. His forces were small compared to many established kingdoms. What made them different were the dragons. Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes changed the balance of power forever. Castles that had resisted siege for centuries suddenly became vulnerable. The conquest unfolded with astonishing speed. Harren the Black died within Harrenhal when Balerion's fire turned the massive castle into a furnace. The Gardeners of the Reach were annihilated alongside their allies during the Field of Fire. House Durrandon lost the Stormlands. One kingdom after another submitted. News of these events traveled northward across hundreds of miles. By the time King Torrhen Stark marched south, the political landscape of Westeros had already been reshaped. The age of independent kingdoms was ending. Why is Torrhen Stark remembered as the king who knelt rather than the king who fought? The title sounds almost insulting at first. Northern pride often celebrates resistance, yet the reality was far more complicated. Torrhen Stark assembled a massive northern host and marched south toward the Trident. He did not surrender immediately. He came prepared for war. Thousands of northern soldiers accompanied him. Lords and bannermen expected battle. Then Torrhen reached the river and saw what had happened to those who had challenged Aegon. Across the Trident stood dragons, not stories, not legends. Real dragons. Valerian, the Black Dread, alone possessed wings large enough to cast vast shadows across the ground. The Field of Fire had already demonstrated what Dragon Flame could do to armies. Harrenhal demonstrated what it could do to castles. Tauren faced a choice no previous Stark ruler had ever encountered: fight and likely doom the North's nobility in a single catastrophic campaign, or preserve his people through submission. The chronicles describe long councils among the northern lords. Advice came from every direction. Some urged war, others counseled caution. Eventually, Tauren crossed the river and bent the knee to Aegon Targaryen. His crown was surrendered. His kingdom ceased to exist as an independent realm. Yet the North survived intact. Winterfell remained in Stark hands. Northern customs remained largely untouched. The Starks transitioned from kings to lords of Winterfell and wardens of the North. The decision remains controversial even centuries later. Some northern voices undoubtedly viewed it as surrender. Others recognized it as extraordinary pragmatism. Had Tauren chosen battle, countless northern houses could have shared the fate of House Gardner. The crypts beneath Winterfell might have received an entire generation of noble dead. Instead, the Stark line continued, uninterrupted. Children inherited ancestral lands. The old gods were still worshipped. The North entered the Targaryen era, bruised in pride perhaps, but fundamentally intact. Why did Tauren's choice matter far beyond his own lifetime? Because his descendants would eventually become some of the most influential figures in the Targaryen realm. By preserving House Stark rather than sacrificing it in a hopeless war, Tauren ensured that Winterfell remained a major power for centuries to come. The wolves no longer wore crowns, but they still commanded immense respect. And as dragon kings settled onto the Iron Throne in the south, a new chapter began, one in which House Stark would become deeply entangled with the fortunes of House Targaryen itself. Why did the Starks become some of the most trusted allies of the Targaryens when they had once been independent kings? The relationship seems unlikely at first. House Stark traced its ancestry back to the Age of Heroes. House Targaryen descended from dragon lords of Valyria. One family worshipped the old gods beneath weirwoods. The other practiced customs born across the narrow sea. Yet over the centuries following Aegon's conquest, mutual respect developed between Winterfell and the Iron Throne. The wolves had surrendered their crowns, but they had not surrendered their identity. The early Targaryen kings understood something important about the North. It was too large, too distant, and too cohesive to govern through force alone. Unlike regions fractured by competing interests, the North remained strongly united beneath House Stark. As a result, the Targaryens generally allowed Winterfell considerable autonomy. The Starks governed northern affairs. Taxes flowed south, oaths were maintained, peace endured. The arrangement benefited both sides and survived for generations. One event reveals that relationship particularly clearly. In 58 AC, Queen Alysanne Targaryen journeyed north on her dragon Silverwing. Her visit became one of the most famous royal progresses in northern history. She visited Winterfell and later traveled to the Wall itself. During her stay, she developed a close friendship with Lord Alaric Stark. The Queen reportedly listened carefully to northern concerns regarding the Night's Watch and conditions along the frontier. Her experience at the wall left a lasting impression upon her. The visit also produced one of the most fascinating moments in dragon lore. According to Fire and Blood, Silverwing willingly flew north to the wall but repeatedly refused to cross beyond it. 3 separate attempts were made. 3 times the dragon turned back. No explanation is provided. The account comes from reliable written sources rather than legend, which makes the mystery all the more compelling. Dragons crossed mountains, seas, deserts, and battlefields without hesitation, yet something beyond the wall caused Silverwing to refuse. Why would a dragon fear the lands beyond the wall? The books never provide a definitive answer. Some readers connect the incident to the others and ancient magic associated with the wall itself. Others argue that powerful enchantments woven into the wall during its construction may have affected dragons. Whatever the explanation, the event feels significant because it links 2 great mysteries of the series: dragons and the far north. The Starks stood at the intersection of both worlds. Their lands bordered dangers that even Dragonfire seemed unwilling to approach. As the Targaryen dynasty matured, another Stark emerged, whose name would echo across history. His name was Cregan Stark. Born in the early 2nd century after the conquest, Cregan inherited Winterfell during a turbulent period. Strong-willed, disciplined, and deeply conscious of duty, he embodied many qualities later associated with Eddard Stark. Yet Cregan lived in a far harsher political age. The Iron Throne was entering one of the bloodiest conflicts in its history. The event would become known as the Dance of the Dragons. Why did a northern lord become one of the most important figures in a civil war fought hundreds of miles from his home? The answer begins with an agreement remembered as the Pact of Ice and Fire. During the dance, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon flew north to secure support for his mother, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. Riding the dragon Vermax, he arrived at Winterfell and met Cregan Stark. The 2 young men reportedly formed a strong friendship. Cregan pledged northern support to Rhaenyra's faction known as the Blacks. In return, discussions occurred regarding a future marriage alliance between Stark and Targaryen bloodlines. The details of that proposed marriage remain uncertain because the pact was never fully realized. Different sources emphasize different aspects of the agreement. What is clear is the Cregan committed the North to Rhaenyra's cause, yet unlike many southern lords who rushed immediately into battle, he moved with characteristic northern caution. Winter was approaching. Harvests had to be secured, supplies had to be gathered. Men needed preparation for a campaign that might last years. The North would march, but it would march on its own timetable. By the time Cregan's forces finally advanced south, much of the war's devastation had already occurred. Dragons had slain dragons. Entire armies had been destroyed. Princes, queens, and heirs were dead. Rook's Rest, Tumbleton the Gullet, and countless lesser engagements had shattered the realm. The dance left House Targaryen victorious only in the most technical sense. The dynasty survived, but its strength had been crippled. Dragons were disappearing. Trust had collapsed. The kingdom stood exhausted. Why is Cregan Stark remembered long after many kings of the era have faded into obscurity? Because when he finally arrived in King's Landing in 131 AC, he transformed the political landscape almost immediately. Aegon II Targaryen had died. His successor, the young Aegon III, remained a child, the capital simmered with suspicion and competing factions. Cregan entered the city at the head of northern troops, hardened by a long march. For a brief period, he became hand of the king. His authority was unquestioned. The period that followed became known as the Hour of the Wolf. The name itself sounds like something from an ancient northern legend. In practice, it referred to Cregan's determination to impose justice swiftly and decisively. He investigated the circumstances surrounding Aegon II's death. Powerful nobles found themselves questioned. Conspirators were arrested. Trials occurred. Several men were condemned. Unlike many southern politicians, Cregan showed little interest in compromise when he believed guilt had been established. One particularly revealing moment involved Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake. Corlys was among the most powerful men in the realm and had served multiple rulers. Many expected harsh punishment. Instead, political realities and appeals from others helped spare his life. Throughout the proceedings, Cregan demonstrated a trait that would become a hallmark of Stark leadership across centuries. Justice mattered more to him than popularity. He was willing to punish the powerful when circumstances demanded it. Yet he was not blind to mercy or practical necessity. Why did Cregan Stark leave power almost as quickly as he acquired it? This remains one of the most striking aspects of his story. He possessed military strength. He enjoyed enormous prestige. Few individuals in the realm could have challenged him directly. Many ambitious men would have remained in King's Landing and expanded their influence. Cregan did the opposite. Once he believed order had been restored and his duty fulfilled, he resigned his position and returned north. That decision reveals something essential about House Stark. Again and again throughout their history, the family shows surprisingly little appetite for ruling the entire realm. They defend their lands fiercely. They honor their obligations. They accept responsibility when required. Yet they rarely seek dominion far beyond the North itself. Cregan could have become one of the dominant political figures of his age. Instead, he chose Winterfell. In the centuries ahead, that same instinct to place duty above ambition would shape the destiny of House Stark again and again as dragons slowly faded from the world and the long Targaryen peace settled across Westeros. Why do centuries of peace often hide the seeds of future catastrophe? After the dance of the dragons ended, the Seven Kingdoms entered a long and complicated period of recovery. House Targaryen still occupied the Iron Throne. House Stark still ruled from Winterfell. Yet the realm that emerged from the Civil War differed profoundly from the one that had existed before it. Most importantly, the dragons were dying. Within a few generations, the great creatures that had forged the Targaryen Empire disappeared entirely. For the first time since Aegon's conquest, political power depended once again upon armies, alliances, wealth, and reputation rather than dragon fire. The Starks adapted to this new reality with characteristic patience. They remained among the most respected noble houses in Westeros, but they rarely dominated court politics. Southern chronicles mention them less frequently than the Lannisters, Hightowers, Velaryons, or Baratheons. This absence can create the illusion that little happened in the north. In reality, northern rulers spent centuries managing harvests, defending borders, settling disputes among bannermen, and preserving stability across an enormous territory. History books often focus on dramatic events. The survival of a kingdom across generations requires quieter work. Winter itself remained one of the Starks' greatest enemies. Long winters shaped every aspect of northern life. Food had to be stored years in advance. Livestock numbers required careful management. Castles prepared constantly for hardship. The old saying that winter is coming carried practical meaning long before it became famous throughout Westeros. Southern rulers could sometimes afford short-term thinking. Northern rulers rarely possessed that luxury. A poor decision during summer might kill people years later when snow buried the roads and rivers froze solid. Why do so many northern traditions feel older than the kingdom itself? One reason is that the Starks actively preserved them. While the South increasingly embraced chivalric culture, elaborate tournaments, and the influence of the Faith of the Seven, many northern customs remained rooted in First Men traditions. Guest right retained enormous importance. Oaths carried tremendous weight. The old gods remained central to daily life. A lord kneeling before a heart tree in Winterfell would have appeared familiar to ancestors who lived thousands of years earlier. Continuity became one of the North's defining strengths. The crypts beneath Winterfell continued expanding during these centuries. New lords joined the long procession of ancestors, stretching deep beneath the castle. Each generation walked the same stone corridors. Each generation passed the same weathered statues. The effect was powerful. A Stark ruler could descend into the crypts and stand face to face with centuries of family history. Few houses in Westeros possessed such a tangible connection to their past. The dead remained present, silent companions to the living. Why did the North remain relatively stable while the rest of Westeros repeatedly descended into crisis? Geography played a role, but culture mattered as well. The North possessed powerful bannermen: Manderly, Umber, Karstark, Glover, Reed, Dustin, Serwyn, and others. But those houses generally accepted Stark leadership. Rebellions occurred far less frequently than in some southern regions. The Boltons remained the historical exception rather than the rule. Most northern lords viewed Winterfell not simply as a political center, but as a symbol of shared identity. The result was remarkable durability. Yet even the North could not remain entirely isolated from events in the South. The Blackfire rebellions, beginning in 196 AC, shook the Seven Kingdoms repeatedly. Daemon Blackfire, the legitimized bastard son of King Aegon IV, challenged his half-brother King Daeron II for the Iron Throne. Great houses chose sides. Armies marched. The conflict resurfaced again and again across generations. While the North never became the primary theater of these wars, the instability affected the entire realm. Every lord understood that civil war could spread unpredictably. The Blackfire era revealed an important truth about House Stark. Unlike many ambitious dynasties, the Starks consistently aligned themselves with lawful succession rather than opportunistic rebellion. They were not perfect. No family survives 8,000 years without making mistakes. Yet again and again, their political instincts favored legitimacy, stability, and duty over personal gain. That tendency helps explain why so many northern houses trusted them. People often knew where the Starks stood, even when they disagreed. Why did the final century of Targaryen rule produce such an unexpected transformation in Stark politics. For most of their history under the Iron Throne, the Starks maintained a certain distance from Southern affairs. Then, during the lifetime of Lord Rickard Stark, something changed. Rickard appears in the historical record as an unusually ambitious and forward-looking ruler. He recognized opportunities that earlier generations had often ignored. Rather than focusing exclusively upon northern concerns, he began building relationships far beyond the neck. Modern readers often encounter the phrase Southron ambitions when discussing Rickard Stark. It is not confirmed canon in the sense of being stated outright within the novels. Instead, it is a well-known theory built upon observable facts. Those facts are striking. Rickard's eldest son, Brandon Stark, was betrothed to Catelyn Tully of Riverrun. His daughter, Lyanna Stark, became betrothed to Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. His younger son, Eddard Stark, was fostered in the Vale under Jon Arryn alongside Robert himself. These connections linked Winterfell to three of the most powerful regions in Westeros. Why would a northern lord pursue so many southern alliances simultaneously? One possibility is simple pragmatism. Strong friendships and marriages reduce the risk of isolation. Another possibility is more ambitious. Some historians inside the world suspect Rickard envisioned a powerful network capable of influencing the entire realm. Whether that interpretation is correct remains uncertain. What cannot be disputed is the scale of the connections he created. House Stark became more deeply integrated into Southern politics than at any time since the conquest. The young people involved in these alliances would later become famous. Brandon Stark, handsome and impulsive, represented the future Lord of Winterfell. Lyanna Stark possessed a fierce spirit remembered decades after her death. Eddard Stark developed into a quiet, honorable young man under Jon Arryn's guidance. Robert Baratheon grew into a charismatic warrior beloved by friends and followers. During these years, none of them knew that they stood at the edge of one of the greatest disasters in Westerosi history. Why does so much of that disaster begin with a single mystery? Because the event that shattered the realm remains partially hidden even now. At the Great Tourney of Harrenhal in 281 AC, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen won the lists. Instead of crowning his wife, Elia Martell, Queen of Love and Beauty, he placed the winter roses in Lyanna Stark's lap. Witnesses remembered the moment for years afterward. The gesture stunned the assembled nobility. At the time, few understood its significance. Looking back, it feels like the first distant crack of thunder before a storm that would sweep away kings, princes, and entire dynasties. Why did the deaths of two Starks bring down a dynasty that had ruled Westeros for nearly 3 centuries? Many wars begin with armies crossing borders. Robert's rebellion began with executions. Before swords were drawn on battlefields, before banners rose above castles, a father and son entered King's Landing seeking justice. Neither would leave alive. Their deaths shattered the fragile balance holding the realm together and transformed House Stark from loyal subjects into leaders of revolution. The chain of events began when Lyanna Stark disappeared with Prince Rhaegar Targaryen sometime after the tourney at Harrenhal. The exact circumstances remain one of the central mysteries of A Song of Ice and Fire. Official accounts long described it as an abduction. Later evidence complicated that interpretation considerably. In the books, the truth remains only partially revealed. What mattered at the time was perception. Brandon Stark, heir to Winterfell and Lyanna's brother, believed the crown prince had taken her against her will. Brandon rode to King's Landing, accompanied by companions whose families included powerful noble houses.
Arriving before the Red Keep, he famously demanded that Rhaegar come out and die. It was a reckless act, born from anger rather than calculation. Rhaegar was not even present in the city. Instead, King Aerys II received the news. By this stage, the king's paranoia had grown severe. Years of fear, suspicion, and obsession with enemies had transformed him into a dangerous ruler. Brandon and his companions were arrested. Why did Aerys turn a political crisis into a catastrophe? Because he no longer thought like a king defending his realm. He thought like a man besieged by imagined conspiracies. Rather than releasing Brandon or negotiating with House Stark, Aerys summoned the fathers of the accused men to King's Landing. Lord Rickard Stark answered the summons as duty required. He arrived expecting a lawful trial. The king promised him one. What followed became one of the most infamous acts in Targaryen history. Rickard Stark demanded trial by combat. Under normal circumstances, such a request would have resulted in champions fighting for justice. Aerys agreed, but with a horrifying twist. He declared fire to be the champion of House Targaryen. Rickard was suspended above flames while Brandon was placed nearby with a device tightening around his neck. A sword lay just beyond his reach. As Rickard slowly burned alive, Brandon strangled himself, trying desperately to save his father. The scene horrified witnesses. In a single day, the Lord of Winterfell and his heir were dead. The consequences were immediate. Aerys demanded that Jon Arryn surrender his wards, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon, for execution. Jon Arryn refused. With that decision, the rebellion began. The Vale, the North, and the Stormlands united. Soon, House Tully joined them through marriage alliances. The political network Rickard Stark had spent years constructing suddenly became the foundation of a military coalition. What may have appeared ambitious during peacetime now became decisive in war. Why did Eddard Stark emerge from this tragedy as leader of House Stark? In many ways, Ned was never expected to inherit Winterfell. Brandon had been raised as heir. Ned spent his youth in the Vale under Jon Arryn's guidance. He learned honor, discipline, and duty there, alongside Robert Baratheon. When Brandon died, everything changed. The quiet second son suddenly became Lord of Winterfell. Before he could fully absorb that reality, he found himself at the center of a civil war that would determine the future of the Seven Kingdoms. The rebellion unfolded across multiple theaters. Robert Baratheon won fame through a string of victories. Jon Arryn secured the Vale. Eddard Stark called the banners of the North and marched south. Important battles followed, including Summerhall, Ashford, and the Bells at Stony Sept. Throughout the conflict, Ned demonstrated qualities different from Robert's. Robert inspired through charisma and battlefield ferocity. Ned inspired through reliability. Men trusted him. Lords respected him. Allies knew where he stood. Why does one battle overshadow all others in the memory of the rebellion? Because the Battle of the Trident decided the war's outcome. In 283 AC, the armies of the rebels met the royal host along the Trident River.
Prince Rhaegar personally commanded the Targaryen forces. Robert Baratheon led the rebels. Thousands fought and died in the crossing. During the battle, Robert killed Rhaegar with a blow from his warhammer. Rubies from the prince's armor scattered into the river, giving rise to the famous image of the Ruby Ford. Rhaegar's death broke the military strength of House Targaryen, yet the war did not end immediately. King's Landing remained under royal control. Aerys still sat the Iron Throne. Tywin Lannister then entered the story. After remaining neutral for much of the conflict, he marched to the capital claiming loyalty to the crown. Aerys opened the gates. The decision proved fatal. Lannister forces sacked the city. Chaos engulfed the capital. The final collapse of Targaryen rule had begun. Why did the victory leave Ned Stark so troubled? Because what he found in King's Landing violated many of the principles he valued most. During the sack, Princess Elia Martell and her children Rhaenys and Aegon were killed by men serving House Lannister. Robert viewed their deaths as politically useful. Ned did not. The disagreement revealed a moral divide between the two friends. They remained allies, but the war's end exposed tensions that would never fully disappear. After King's Landing fell, one final task remained. Lyanna Stark had still not been found. Ned rode south with a small group of companions, eventually reaching a remote location in Dorne remembered as the Tower of Joy. Waiting there were 3 members of the Kingsguard: Sir Gerald Hightower, Sir Oswell Went, and Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Their presence immediately raised questions. The war was effectively over. The royal family was collapsing, yet 3 of the realm's greatest knights remained stationed at this isolated tower. Why were the finest Kingsguard in Westeros guarding a lonely tower instead of protecting their king? That question lies at the heart of one of the series' greatest mysteries. The confrontation ended in bloodshed. Ned's companions died. Arthur Dayne fell. Only Ned Stark and Howland Reed survived. What happened inside the tower remains partially hidden from readers. We know Ned found Lyanna there. We know she died shortly afterward. We know her final words haunted him for the rest of his life. The famous phrase, "Promise me, Ned," echoes through the novels without full explanation. Later evidence strongly supports the theory that Lyanna had given birth to a child. Most readers believe the child was Jon Snow, the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. The books have not yet provided absolute confirmation, but the evidence is overwhelming. If true, Ned's greatest secret was not political ambition or personal shame. It was an act of protection. He carried that burden in silence for nearly 2 decades. When Eddard Stark finally returned north, the realm had changed completely. Robert Baratheon sat the Iron Throne. House Targaryen had fallen. Winterfell had a new lord. Yet the victory carried scars that never fully healed. Rickard and Brandon Stark were dead. Lyanna was gone. The dreams of one generation had ended in fire and blood. A quieter generation now took their place, and none embodied that transition more completely than Eddard Stark himself. Why does Eddard Stark remain one of the most admired figures in Westeros despite losing nearly every political struggle he entered? The answer begins with understanding the kind of lord he became after Robert's rebellion. Many victorious commanders emerge from war seeking greater influence, wealth, or prestige. Ned Stark returned to Winterfell instead. He married Catelyn Tully, raised his children, governed the North, and largely avoided the intrigues of King's Landing. For nearly 15 years, his life appeared remarkably stable. Yet beneath that calm surface, the consequences of the rebellion continued to shape the realm. Winter fell. During Ned's rule, reflected many of the values House Stark had preserved for centuries. Justice was personal. Responsibility could not be delegated entirely to others. In the opening chapters of A Game of Thrones, Ned executes a deserter from the Night's Watch himself. Afterwards, he explains to Bran that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. The lesson is simple but profound. Authority and accountability must remain connected. It is a philosophy that would have been understood by the kings of Winter thousands of years earlier. The Stark household itself became a gathering point for different strands of Northern history. Robb Stark grew up as heir to Winterfell. Sansa learned the customs of noble courts. Arya preferred swords to embroidery. Bran dreamed of becoming a knight. Rickon remained too young to understand the burdens awaiting him. Then there was Jon Snow, raised alongside Ned's true-born children, despite the social stigma surrounding bastardy. The arrangement puzzled many observers, especially because Ned refused to discuss Jon's mother. Why did Ned guard Jon Snow's origins so fiercely? In the years before the publication of A Dance with Dragons, readers debated the question endlessly. The theory that Jon was the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen became one of the most famous in fantasy literature. The books have not yet completed that revelation outright, but clues accumulated steadily across the series. Ned's unusual protectiveness, Lyanna's dying plea, and the circumstances surrounding the Tower of Joy all point in the same direction. If the theory is correct, House Stark preserved not merely a child, but the last hidden remnant of the dynasty they had helped overthrow. The peace of Robert's reign began unraveling with the death of Jon Arryn. As Hand of the King, Arryn had served as a stabilizing force between competing factions. His sudden death in 298 AC created a vacuum. King Robert traveled north to Winterfell and asked Ned to become the new Hand. The request carried enormous weight. Robert trusted few people completely. Ned trusted the capital even less. Yet friendship, duty, and concern for the realm ultimately compelled him to accept. Why did the move to King's Landing prove so disastrous for House Stark? Because the capital rewarded qualities very different from those valued in the North. Winterfell operated through directness. King's Landing operated through secrets. Information became currency. Alliances shifted constantly. Powerful figures such as Peter Baelish, Varys, Cersei Lannister, and Tywin Lannister treated politics as an intricate game. Ned approached it as a moral responsibility. He was intelligent, but he assumed others shared at least some commitment to honor. Again and again, that assumption placed him at a disadvantage. While serving as Hand, Ned uncovered evidence regarding the parentage of Queen Cersei's children. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen appeared to be the offspring of Jaime Lannister rather than Robert Baratheon. Under Westerosi law, the revelation threatened the legitimacy of the royal succession. Ned faced a difficult choice. Rather than immediately exposing the secret, he warned Cersei and gave her an opportunity to flee with her children. The decision reflected compassion and honor. Politically, it proved catastrophic. Why did honor fail Ned Stark? when it had served House Stark for centuries? The answer is not that honor itself was flawed. Rather, the political environment had changed. Ancient northern traditions developed within a society that valued reputation and direct obligation. King's Landing had evolved into something different. There, mercy could be exploited. Trust could be weaponized. Robert died before decisive action could be taken. Cersei moved quickly. Allies vanished, promises dissolved. The balance of power shifted almost overnight. One of the most painful moments in the story occurs when Ned places trust in Peter Baelish. Littlefinger assures him of support from the City Watch. Instead, the Gold Cloaks betray him. Surrounded and outnumbered, Ned is arrested. His household guard is slaughtered. The political contest effectively ends. What follows is no longer a struggle for influence, but a struggle for survival. Even then, Ned's primary concern remains his daughters. Personal sacrifice once again outweighs personal ambition. Why does Ned's execution remain such a pivotal moment in the history of House Stark? Because it shattered assumptions shared by both characters and readers. Traditionally, honorable protagonists survive. Wise rulers prevail. Justice triumphs. George R.R. Martin deliberately overturned those expectations. Despite confessing falsely in hopes of saving his family, Ned was condemned by King Joffrey. In 299 AC, on the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor, he was executed with ice, the ancestral Valyrian steel greatsword of House Stark. The symbolism was devastating. Ice had represented Stark authority for centuries. The blade had carried out executions in accordance with northern custom. Now it became the instrument of a Stark's death. The loss extended beyond one man. A piece of the family's identity vanished alongside him. Later, Tywin Lannister would have ice reforged into two separate swords, Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail. Even the physical symbol of Stark continuity seemed broken apart. Why did Ned's death strengthen House Stark rather than destroy it immediately? Because the North responded with fury. Robb Stark gathered bannermen and marched south. Great houses answered his call. Umber, Karstark, Mormont, Glover, Serwyn, Tallheart, Hornwood, and many others joined the campaign. What began as an effort to rescue Ned transformed into something larger. The old political order was collapsing. Northern lords increasingly questioned why they should remain subjects of a southern crown that had executed their lord unjustly. The answer came at River Run. Following military successes and growing outrage, Robb Stark was proclaimed king in the north by his bannermen. The title had not been used since Torrhen Stark bent the knee nearly 300 years earlier. In that moment, ancient history returned. The old kings seemed suddenly close again. The memory of Winter Kings, Red Kings, Marsh Kings, and forgotten dynasties stirred beneath the surface of the present. For the first time in centuries, House Stark wore a crown once more, and the realm began sliding toward a conflict that would test the family more severely than any war since the Long Night. Why did the Starks lose the War of the Five Kings after winning so many of its battles? It is one of the great ironies of Westerosi history. Robb Stark proved himself an extraordinary battlefield commander almost immediately. His armies defeated opponents who possessed greater resources and larger populations. Northern morale soared. Southern commanders underestimated him repeatedly. Yet military victory and political victory are not always the same thing. The deeper Robb advanced into the war, the more dangerous the political landscape became. The first major triumph came at the Whispering Wood in 299 AC. Robb divided his forces skillfully and lured Sir Jaime Lannister into a trap near River Run. The result was stunning. Jaime's army was shattered. The Kingslayer himself was captured. For a brief moment, it seemed as though House Lannister might collapse under the pressure. Lords throughout Westeros suddenly realized that the young king in the north was far more capable than anyone had expected. His reputation grew with every victory. The successes continued. Robb crossed into the Westerlands and defeated Stafford Lannister at the Battle of Oxcross. The campaign demonstrated speed, surprise, and tactical flexibility. Northern cavalry appeared where they were least expected. Lannister plans unraveled. Songs began celebrating the young wolf. Even enemies acknowledged his talent. Yet while Robb won battles in the field, powerful figures elsewhere were constructing alliances that could not be defeated by swords alone. Why did one broken marriage promise become so important? Because in feudal politics, personal commitments often carried strategic consequences. Early in the war, House Frey agreed to support Robb's crossing of the twins. In exchange, Robb promised to marry one of Lord Walder Frey's daughters. The alliance provided critical military access. Later, after being wounded during the campaign in the Westerlands, Robb married Jane Westerling in the novels. The television adaptation changes this detail significantly, but in the books, Jane belongs to House Westerling rather than being a foreign noblewoman. Whatever his reasons, the marriage broke the Frey agreement. The insult cut deeply. Walder Frey was proud, resentful, and intensely conscious of status. To many southern lords, the Freys appeared opportunistic. To Walder himself, Robb's decision represented humiliation. The young wolf still possessed military strength, but he had weakened one of his most important political relationships. At the same time, other cracks were appearing. Lord Rickard Karstark demanded vengeance for the deaths of his sons. Tensions spread through the Northern Coalition. Maintaining unity became increasingly difficult. Why did Winterfell itself fall while its king campaigned hundreds of miles away? The answer came from an unexpected source. Theon Greyjoy had grown up at Winterfell as Ned Stark's ward. After Balon Greyjoy's failed rebellion, Robb considered him a friend. Seeking naval support, Robb sent Theon to negotiate with his father. Instead, Balon launched an invasion of the North. Theon attempted to prove himself to House Greyjoy by capturing Winterfell with a small force. The achievement was militarily impressive, but strategically reckless. Unable to maintain control, Theon's position deteriorated rapidly. Bran and Rickon Stark escaped. Theon falsely claimed to have killed them, displaying the bodies of two peasant boys in their place. Meanwhile, another player entered the story. Ramsay Snow, bastard son of Roose Bolton, manipulated events skillfully. Disguised and deceptive, Ramsay eventually seized Winterfell. The ancient castle was sacked and burned. Smoke rose above walls that had stood for thousands of years. For the first time since the Age of Heroes, Winterfell itself appeared broken. Why did the destruction of Winterfell feel so much larger than the loss of a castle? Because Winterfell was never merely a military stronghold. It represented continuity. It connected living Starks to ancestors stretching back to Brandon the Builder.
Its crypts preserved memory, its gods' wood preserved tradition. When flames consumed parts of the castle, it felt as though the history of the North itself had been wounded. Across the realm, many believed Bran and Rickon were dead. House Stark suddenly appeared to be collapsing from within. Meanwhile, beyond the wall, another Stark faced a different struggle. Jon Snow had joined the Night's Watch and risen steadily through its ranks. During the Great Ranging led by Lord Commander Jorah Mormont, he traveled deep into the haunted forests beyond the wall. There he encountered wildlings, ancient dangers, and growing evidence that the others were real. While southern kings fought for crowns, Jon found himself confronting threats that had not been seen for thousands of years. The contrast is central to the books. Most of Westeros obsesses over politics while winter approaches. Jon's experiences among the free folk transformed him. He met Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. He traveled with Ygritte. He witnessed the desperation driving wildling migration southward. The enemy beyond the wall was not simply an army, it was a changing world. Ancient forces were awakening. Dead men walked. Rangers disappeared. The old stories the South dismissed as myths began proving true. Through Jon, House Stark became connected once more to the oldest responsibilities of the Kings of Winter. Why did the greatest disaster of the war occur beneath a roof protected by sacred custom? In Westeros, guest right is among the most ancient and respected traditions. Once food and shelter are offered, host and guest become bound by obligation. The custom predates kingdoms, dynasties, and religions. Violating it is considered abhorrent by nearly every culture in Westeros. That is precisely why the Red Wedding shocked the realm so profoundly. It broke rules older than politics itself. The event unfolded at the Twins during the wedding of Edmure Tully and Rosalind Frey. Robb Stark attended alongside his mother, Catelyn Stark, and many key northern lords. Music played, toasts were exchanged. The atmosphere appeared festive. Then the massacre began. Crossbowmen emerged. Frey soldiers attacked. Roose Bolton revealed his betrayal. Robb Stark was murdered. Catelyn Stark died shortly afterward. Much of the northern leadership was destroyed in a single night. The Red Wedding accomplished what years of campaigning had failed to achieve. It shattered the political and military strength of House Stark. Yet even here, the story refuses to end neatly. In the books, Catelyn Stark's body is later recovered from the Green Fork and resurrected by Beric Dondarrion through the power of R'hllor. She becomes Lady Stoneheart, a figure driven almost entirely by vengeance. The television adaptation omits this storyline completely. The books, however, leave the consequences of the Red Wedding still unfolding. Why did House Stark survive despite losing Ned, Robb, Catelyn, Winterfell, and apparently several heirs? Because the family had become scattered rather than extinguished. Sansa remained alive. Arya remained alive. Bran remained alive. Rickon remained alive. Jon Snow stood at the wall. Enemies believed they had destroyed House Stark. In reality, the wolves had simply been driven apart. Across Westeros and beyond, separate paths were beginning to converge. And as winter deepened, those scattered heirs carried with them something older than crowns, castles, or armies, the accumulated memory of 8,000 years. Why does House Stark appear strongest when it is most divided?
By the end of a storm of swords, the family seems shattered beyond repair. Eddard Stark is dead. Robb Stark is dead. Catelyn Stark is dead, or at least transformed into something far removed from the woman who once ruled Winterfell beside her husband. Winterfell lies in ruins. The Boltons hold power in the north. Southern observers increasingly speak of House Stark as a fallen dynasty. Yet beneath that appearance of collapse, something remarkable is taking shape. The surviving Stark children are each traveling toward different aspects of the family's oldest inheritance. Sansa Stark's path leads into the politics of the South. After escaping King's Landing, she arrives in the Vale under the protection of Peter Baelish. Officially, she hides as Elaine Stone, Littlefinger's bastard daughter. Unofficially, she remains one of the most valuable political figures in Westeros. Through her blood, she represents a legitimate connection to Winterfell. Lords who dismiss armies or castles often underestimate the importance of claims. Littlefinger certainly does not. He recognizes that the name Stark still carries enormous weight. The Vale itself occupies a fascinating place in Stark history. Decades earlier, Eddard Stark grew to adulthood there under Jon Arryn's guidance. Now Sansa walks many of the same halls. Yet where Ned learned honor and duty, Sansa learns political observation. She watches how alliances form. She studies deception. She begins understanding motives hidden beneath polite conversation. The transformation is gradual but significant. A daughter of Winterfell is acquiring skills her father never fully mastered. Why does Arya Stark travel farther from Winterfell than any of her siblings? Because her story increasingly explores identity itself. After escaping the chaos of the Riverlands, Arya crosses the narrow sea and reaches Braavos. There she encounters the House of Black and White and the mysterious Faceless Men. The organization possesses abilities unlike anything found elsewhere in the series. Faces can be changed, names can be abandoned. Personal history becomes something to surrender. Yet Arya's journey repeatedly demonstrates how difficult it is to stop being a Stark. Even in Braavos, the old lessons remain. Needle stays with her. Memories of Winterfell endure. The names she repeats before sleep preserve a connection to her past. The Faceless Men teach her many things, but complete erasure proves impossible. In a series filled with shifting identities and hidden truths, Arya represents a paradox. She learns how to become someone else while remaining fundamentally herself. The wolf survives beneath every disguise. Why does Bran Stark's journey feel as though it belongs to an older story than the War of the Five Kings? Because Bran gradually leaves politics behind and enters the deepest layers of the world's mythology, guided first by dreams and later by companions such as Mira Reed, Jojen Reed, Hodor, and Cold Hands. He travels beyond the wall. The landscape changes, familiar concerns disappear, ancient mysteries emerge. Bran's destination lies far from crowns and castles. His path eventually leads to the cave of the last Green Seer, often identified by readers as Brynden Rivers, known in life as Bloodraven. Bloodraven himself connects multiple eras of history. He was a great bastard of House Targaryen, served as Hand of the King, became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and ultimately vanished beyond the wall. Through him, Bran encounters powers rooted in the old gods. Weirwood roots stretch through darkness. Visions reveal fragments of past and present, time itself begins behaving differently. Why do so many clues suggest that the Starks possess abilities older than their kingdom? The answer emerges gradually through Bran's experiences and through the dire wolves. Warging, the ability to enter the minds of animals, appears repeatedly among the Stark children. Bran demonstrates the strongest talent. Arya unknowingly influences Nymeria across enormous distances. Jon shares an unusually deep bond with Ghost. Even Robb appears connected to Grey Wind during the war. Such abilities are rare elsewhere in Westeros but seem concentrated within this family. The dire wolves themselves carry enormous symbolic significance. South of the Wall, they have been absent for centuries. Then, at the beginning of the story, a dead dire wolf is discovered beside a stag. The symbolism is unmistakable in retrospect. The stag represents House Baratheon. The dire wolf represents House Stark. 6 pups survive, matching the number of Stark children raised at Winterfell. The event feels almost prophetic. Ancient forces appear to be moving once more. Why does Jon Snow increasingly resemble the ancient kings of Winter, rather than a brother of the Night's Watch? As Lord Commander, Jon faces impossible decisions. Wildlings seek refuge south of the Wall. The others continue advancing. Resources are limited. Opposition grows within the Watch. Like many Stark rulers before him, Jon discovers that leadership often means choosing between bad options and worse ones. Popularity becomes irrelevant. Survival becomes everything. One of Jon's most controversial decisions involves allowing thousands of wildlings through the Wall. Traditional enemies become reluctant allies. Many Black brothers view the policy as betrayal. Jon views it as necessity. Dead wildlings would simply strengthen the armies of the others. The dilemma echoes ancient Stark responsibilities. For thousands of years, rulers of Winterfell confronted threats larger than politics. Jon finds himself doing the same. Why do the Boltons' victories feel increasingly fragile despite their apparent success? Because power built upon fear often lacks deep roots. Rose Bolton gains control of the North through betrayal and royal support. Ramsay Bolton uses terror to maintain authority. Yet neither possesses the legitimacy accumulated by House Stark across centuries. Northern houses remember, the Manderleys remember, the mountain clans remember. Even families forced into temporary submission continue looking toward Winterfell. One of the most powerful examples appears in A Dance with Dragons through Lord Wyman Manderley. Publicly, he appears submissive. Secretly, he pursues vengeance for the Red Wedding. His famous declaration that the North remembers captures a central truth about Stark history. Memory has always been one of the family's greatest strengths. Kingdoms rise and fall, dynasties collapse, yet Northern memory preserves old loyalties long after political circumstances change. Why do the final chapters of the published novels keep returning to Winter? Because the story is gradually revealing that the struggle for the Iron Throne was never the true center of events. The others move south. The Wall weakens. Ancient prophecies resurface. Dragons have returned through Daenerys Targaryen across the Narrow Sea. Magic grows stronger throughout the world. Suddenly, the warnings carried by House Stark for thousands of years seem less like a family motto and more like a description of reality itself. As the surviving Stark children move along separate paths, an extraordinary pattern emerges. Sansa learns politics, Arya learns identity and survival, Bran learns the deepest secrets of the old gods. Jon confronts the responsibilities of leadership at the edge of the world. Rickon's fate remains unresolved on Skagos. Each carries a different fragment of the Stark legacy. And as snow falls across the north, covering ruined towers and frozen battlefields alike, the ancient words spoken by generations of Winterfell rulers feel closer than ever before. Winter is coming. I think one reason House Stark endures so powerfully in the imagination is that its story is not really about victory. When you look across 8,000 years, the Starks lose almost as often as they win. They lose kingdoms, they lose children, they lose fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, castles, armies, and crowns. Brandon the Builder vanishes into legend. Torrhen Stark kneels. Rickard Stark burns. Eddard Stark dies beneath a southern king's sentence. Robb Stark falls at a wedding feast. Yet somehow the family remains. Martin seems less interested in asking who wins than in asking what survives after defeat. The answer, again and again, is memory. The Starks are often described as honorable, but honor alone does not explain their longevity. Many honorable people die young in this world. What distinguishes House Stark is a peculiar relationship with time. Most rulers in Westeros think in seasons, reigns, or lifetimes. The Starks think in centuries. Their words are not a promise of triumph. They are a reminder that prosperity is temporary. Winter always returns. The family survives because it never completely forgets that truth. While other houses chase moments of glory, the rulers of Winterfell prepare for hardships that have not arrived yet. That idea runs through nearly every generation we encountered. The ancient kings of winter defended the wall long after the long night had faded into legend. Torrhen Stark surrendered a crown to preserve a people. Cregan Stark abandoned power when duty was fulfilled. Eddard Stark sacrificed his reputation to protect a child. Jon Snow risks his position to save lives others would rather ignore. These decisions do not always produce immediate rewards. Sometimes they bring suffering instead, yet they are linked by a shared belief that responsibility matters more than recognition. In Martin's world, that belief is rare enough to feel almost radical. There is also something deeper, moving beneath the history of House Stark. The family stands at the meeting point between history and myth. Their ancestors fought Bolton kings and Andal invaders, but they are also connected to weirwoods, greenseers, skin changers, and stories older than recorded memory. The farther north you travel in the books, the thinner the boundary becomes between political history and ancient magic. Bran's journey beyond the wall is not a departure from Stark history. It is a return to its oldest roots. The family that built Winterfell may have forgotten many things over 8,000 years, but some part of its original purpose still lingers. Perhaps that is why the Stark words carry such unusual weight. Winter is coming is not merely a warning about weather, it is a philosophy. It acknowledges that comfort fades, power shifts, kingdoms crumble, and human lives pass quickly. At the same time, it contains a quieter message. If winter is always coming, then spring is always possible as well. The Starks endure because they understand both halves of that cycle. They do not deny darkness, but neither do they surrender to it. Their history becomes a long conversation between endurance and hope. And so, as the story settles into silence, you return to where it began. Snow drifts softly through the night around Winterfell. Ancient walls rise from the darkness, warmed from below by hidden hot springs that have flowed since the oldest days of the world. Deep beneath the castle, generations of Stark kings and lords rest among stone dire wolves and iron swords, their names stretching backward through centuries beyond counting. Above them, winter winds whisper across battlements and through the branches of the godswood, and out beyond the walls, standing watch in the falling snow, a lone dire wolf remains where it has always been, patient as memory itself.